SLT අලුත් මෙගා ලයින් කනෙක්ෂන් වලට 50%ක දීවන. තවත් ඔෆර් ගැන දැනගන්න 12112 අමතන්න.
Tonight, notices over alleged crimes. What's the real motive behind former Defence Secretary being served with court notices?
The use of the courts of a country to secure an irrelevant objective, political motivation.
How many times government tried to prevent him becoming the candidate?
Unfathomable links. Court hears that Markandre Madush is involved in a VIP assassination plot. Where did the money go? Opposition leader pins the rise in state debt on the good governance government's electioneering. An obsolete system. Venerable Dr. Omalpe Sobidathera urges the government to do away with the provincial council system. All this and much more coming up on First at 9 this Tuesday, the 9th of April.
From AdaDerana, this is AdaDerana First at 9. Live from Studio 24 in Colombo.
A very good evening and welcome to First at 9 on AdaDerana 24, Sri Lanka's news channel. I'm Katharina Chang. Now moving on to your top story tonight. Chairman of the Sri Lanka Polujana Peramuna, Professor G.L. Peiris, is of the view that the motive behind cases being filed against former Defence Secretary Gotabaya Rajapaksa in the United States is to block his route to the presidency. An international organization yesterday revealed that the former Defence Secretary was served with notices for 2 cases filed against him in US courts. A representative of the Sri Lanka Global Forum was also critical of the move, speculating that the government is behind the move.
The international organization named the Truth and Justice Project yesterday said that 2 cases were filed against former Defence Secretary Gotabaya Rajapaksa in the United States. They said that the cases relate to the murder of journalist Lasantha Wickramatunge and the alleged torture of a Tamil national named Roy Samanathan in Sri Lanka. The organisation charged that the Canadian Samanathan was physically and mentally tortured by the Terrorism Investigation Division under the former Defence Secretary Rajapaksa in 2007 and was released in 2010 after getting him to sign a document under duress. A family member of slain journalist Lasantha Wickramatunge is said to have filed the other case. Organisation dubbed the Truth and Justice Project claims that notices for both cases issued by US courts were handed over to the former Defence Secretary Gotabaya Rajapaksa at the Trader Joe's car park in Pasadena, California on Sunday. However, a spokesperson for Gotabaya Rajapaksa said that the former Defence Secretary, who is in the United States at present, rejected the reports which claimed that he was served with court notices in the US. The spokesperson also said that the former Defence Secretary is also not in the state of California but is in the state of Nevada. He added that Gotabaya Rajapaksa would return to Sri Lanka on the 12th of April for the Sinhala and Tamil New Year. Meanwhile, the topic of the former Defence Secretary being served with notices issued by US courts was also discussed at several platforms today.
The issue here relates to the bona fides of this litigation. Is there a reasonable basis for these actions to be brought? The Wickramatunge matter is 10 years old. The Samanathan matter is 12 years old. Throughout that period, every year, Gotabaya Rajapaksa has been visiting the United States. It is therefore remarkable that neither of these people felt it necessary to initiate action during the whole of that period, and suddenly they have come into life and decided to take this initiative. It is very clear what the motive is. The motivation is clearly connected with the presidential election that will take place in this country towards the end of this year. Both under the law of the United States and the law of Sri Lanka, there is a fundamental principle which has been accepted without question. That is the use of the judicial process, the use of the courts of a country to secure an irrelevant objective, political motivation.
Now, all these are attempts and high expectations that they can prevent Mr. Gotabaya Rajapaksa renouncing the US citizenship, which qualifies him to contest the next presidential election. These are all futile exercises. As far as we are concerned, no summons have been served. Even if it is true, that has no bearing on him renouncing the citizenship. A case can be filed while he is a citizen or even after. That has nothing to do with renouncing the citizenship. Now, what we must remember is how many times government tried during the last 4 years to prevent him becoming the candidate. Initially, they even changed the constitution of this country, saying that dual citizens cannot contest. Then they did so many investigations and tried to file so many cases. They even influenced the judiciary and set up a special court just for Mr. Gotabaya Rajapaksa. Now all these attempts continue and they seem to be failing, and this is the latest effort, that filing a lawsuit, which is also going to be another futile exercise.
Minister of Power and Renewable Energy Ravi Karunanika once again moved to give a reminder to the members of the public that power cuts will be a thing of the past after tomorrow. With only a day's scheduled power interruptions to be endured, people are unhappy that they had to suffer power cuts in the first place, with some more disgruntled than others for very good reason.
In a backdrop where the country is facing a 340 megawatt power shortage in the daily requirement of 2,250 megawatts, the Minister of Power and Renewable Energy, Ravi Karunanika, introduced a daily power cut spanning for 4 hours. Locals in Haliela, however, allege that despite the announced power cut being scheduled for only 4 hours, they experienced an approximately 10-hour power cut yesterday. They said that power supply was interrupted from 8 am to 11:30 am and then again from 1 pm to 7 pm. Meanwhile, members of the Sri Lanka Podujana Peramuna at the Galigamuwa Pradesha Sabha protested against the ongoing power cuts during the monthly session today. Members of the Attanagala Pradesha Sabha too staged a protest against power cuts during today's session. In the meantime, Ceylon Electricity Board's Joint Trade Union, convening a media briefing today, said that if 25% of electricity can be obtained by on-site power generators in both state and private sectors, the prevailing power crisis could be resolved. Subject Minister Ravi Karunanika, however, once again insisted that tomorrow will be the last day of the power cuts. There will be no more power cuts after tomorrow night because there is no need to. A plan to generate power is in place, and if it is successful, the move will be implemented in the long run after 1.5 years. However, I request the public to use power prudently, even after the power cuts come to an end. A cooperation agreement was inked with the Ministry of Power and Energy and Business Development and Canadian Commercial Corporation to build a floating solar power plant under the auspices of President Maithripala Sirisena this morning. It is reported that 50% of the power necessity will be met by 2030 through renewable energy with the help of this solar power project.
The Attorney General's Department today informed court that measures are being taken at diplomatic level to ensure that drug kingpin Markandre Madush is extradited to Sri Lanka within the next 2 weeks. This was informed by Deputy Solicitor General Dilipa Piris when the case pertaining to the VIP assassination plot was taken up at the Colombo Fort Magistrates Court. During today's proceedings, Fort Magistrate Rangadisanaika ordered that former DIG Nalaka De Silva be further remanded until the 23rd of April over his alleged involvement in the assassination plot against the head of state and the former Defence Secretary. The magistrate also ordered the CID to submit forensic evidence which links the former DIG to the plot on the day of the next hearing. Giving reasons as to why forensic evidence has not been submitted thus far, the Deputy Solicitor General Dilipa Piris cited planned attempts by certain factions to destroy the evidence. Piris added that the VIP assassination plot is complex owing to the involvement of various parties. The Deputy Solicitor General also informed court that one of the parties involved in the plot is Markandre Madush, and measures are being taken at diplomatic level to bring him back to the country. Magistrate Rangadisanaika meanwhile ordered the Criminal Investigation Department to provide necessary security anti-corruption activist Nama Kumara under Witness Protection Act. In September last year, director an organization dubbed the Anti-Corruption Force, Nama Kumar revealed information of the conspiracy and the alleged conversations he had with former DIG Nalaka De Silva over a plot to assassinate President Maithripala Sirisena and former Defence Secretary Gotabaya Rajapaksa. Opposition leader Mahinda Rajapaksa charges that the government is caught up in a vicious cycle where it is compelled to increase tax on the public to service debt incurred by heavy borrowings to finance the expenditure for its electioneering. Issuing a media communique today, the opposition leader went on to say that the total outstanding government debt increased by 62% since it came to power in 2015. He noted that money was not spent on anything productive other than for inducing people to vote for the Apalanya government. Opposition leader Mahinda Rajapaksa issued a media communique today pertaining to the budget, particularly over the allocations made to the Department of Samurdhi Development. The opposition leader said that the rhetoric of the government makes it obvious that the additional 600,000 Samurdhi recipients will be selected on political criteria for reasons more to do with elections than with poverty alleviation. He further noted that there is inherent contradiction in the government claiming on one hand that poverty has been reduced and then increasing the number of Samurdhi recipients by over 40%. The communique also noted that the purpose of having compulsory savings for Samurdhi recipients is to encourage the habit of saving and to enable them to utilize that money for self-employment and other livelihood-related activities. The opposition leader lamented the state of the government debt, saying the total outstanding government debt increased from 7.39 trillion rupees in 2014 to more than 11.86 trillion rupees by the end of 2018, an increase of 62%. Therefore, the opposition leader says that the government is caught up in a vicious cycle, going from increasing government spending for its electioneering needs to heavy borrowing to finance that expenditure, and then to increasing taxation of the public to service those loans. Meanwhile, opposition leader Mahinda Rajapaksa met with representatives from the Colombo Business Association last evening. During the meeting, he said that the current government failed to comprehend the needs of the people when implementing the development projects initiated by his government. This, he says, has led to the downfall of all sectors. Venerable Dr. Omar Pesobitathere insists that it is high time for the government to do away with the provincial council system, since the purpose for which the system was originally introduced now ceases to exist. Speaking to media following an event held in Amblipitiya, Thathere said that there is no need for provincial council elections to be held either, as provincial administration is being done unhindered, even at a time when 7 out of Sri Lanka's 9 provincial councils are not functioning. Thathere added that there are 450 provincial council members in total, and their upkeep incurs the state 2.25 billion rupee expenditure each year. He said that a further 5 billion rupees spent on the external facilities, commissions obtained through development activities and other expenditure. Thathere charged that there is absolutely no benefit from spending such national wealth, and that despite the fact that 7 provincial councils are currently not functioning due to their terms being expired, any issues have not materialized. He said that therefore, under such a situation, it is clear that provincial councils have become obsolete. According to Thathere, provincial councils were a burden placed on Sri Lanka by the Indian government, and that although it was accepted then as a solution to terrorism, it should be done away with immediately, since terrorism is now defeated in the country.
අනිත් බාහිර පහසුකම් මහජන සංවර්ධන කටයුතු වලින් ලැබෙන කොමිස් කුට්ටි මේ සියල්ලම ගත්තොත් එහෙම අවුරුද්දකට මං හිතනවා.
A person who was employed at a hotel under construction at Golface in Colombo has died after falling off the 18th floor. The deceased was identified as a 22-year-old youth who was residing in the area of Megahatanda. The remains of the deceased are currently placed at the Colombo National Hospital. Colombo Fort Police is conducting further investigation into the incident. A Sri Lankan national is sentenced to 30 years of rigorous imprisonment in India, 10 years after authorities discovered over a kilogram of heroin in his bank locker. Indian media outlet The Times of India reported the news, saying that Sri Lankan M. Ashok Kumar is at present serving an 11-year jail term in another case. It is added that the new sentence was given yesterday, accompanied by a fine of 300,000 Indian rupees, as he was a repeat offender. India's Narcotics Control Bureau had arrested the suspect on the 23rd of January in 2009 over the discovery of another stash of heroin in 2002. And with that, we cross over to a short commercial break, but make sure you stay tuned for business news on the other side.
You are watching Sri Lanka's #1 news channel. This is AdaDerana 24.
Governor of the Central Bank, Dr. Indrajit Kumaraswamy, stresses that the private sector credit would need to grow at an average rate of 75 billion rupees per month over the remainder of the year if the sector is to achieve its growth target of 13.5%. In the backdrop where the private sector growth decelerated in the first 2 months of 2019. Meanwhile, the Central Bank forecasts GDP growth to be at 4%, while inflation is expected to be at 5%. Officials also expect the nominal GDP to grow at around 9% this year, as exports witnessed an increase of 7.3% in the first 2 months of this year. With this backdrop, the Central Bank governor assures that the country's external sector, which was a source of significant stress last year, is at a much more comfortable position this year.
If you recall, last year the external account was a big problem. The trade deficit by this time was ballooning. But we've seen the trade deficit almost halve this year in the first 2 months. January and February, the trade deficit has come down from $2.1 billion to $1.1 billion. The sources of pressure that were there last year, that is motor vehicle imports, gold imports and oil, first two have responded to remedial measures taken by the government and the central bank. And of course, oil prices, though they are increasing at the moment, have come off their higher rates last year. And in fact, the current account deficit, which went up to 3.2% of GDP this year, we initially thought it would come down to 2.3% of GDP. Now it is possible, if present trends continue and there are no shocks, exogenous or domestic, that the current account could be even a little less. The improvement in the trade account in particular, and through that the current account deficit as well, has meant that there has been less pressure on the rupee. As a result of the strengthening of the current account, or the inflows have been stronger than they were last year in relation to the outflows. And on top of that, the global risk appetite for emerging markets, high-yielding assets, has also been much more bullish this year, which has meant that the external front has also given a tailwind as far as the currency is concerned.
Improved balance between inflows and outflows in Sri Lanka's balance of payments, as well as the more proficient external sector, had resulted $42 million coming into the government securities market so far this year. This has enabled the central bank to exceed its targets in terms of direct purchases from markets and ensure the appreciation of the Sri Lankan rupee, which is rising at a rate of 4.5%. The central bank governor, however, expressed concern on the dearth of credit in the private sector, with private sector credit being down in the first few months of the year in comparison to the same period in 2018. With the expected year-on-year growth rate in the sector being 13.5%, the governor said that achieving the set target looks problematic.
762 billion rupees of credit flowed into the private sector last year, but in the first 2 months, minus 4.3 in January, plus 7.6% billion in February, which are way below. Now, if we are to reach the target for the private sector credit that we have, private sector credit would need to grow at the rate of, at an average of 75 billion per month over the remainder of the year. So clearly this is a problem that needs to be addressed.
Responding to a question, Dr. Kumaraswamy also ventured his thoughts on the investment front in an election year.
Clearly, at this time of the political cycle, there's elevated uncertainty. When you're within 1 year of presidential elections and maybe 18 months or less of a general election, plus I think everybody in the country knows the challenges of having cohabitation and the difficulties that arise through that. That will be a factor because we see investment is subdued.
Goldman Sachs has raised its forecast for crude oil prices this year, with supply hit by the shock and awe implementation of OPEC-led output cuts and by US sanctions on Iran and Venezuela. Reuters quoted a note by the investment bank dated 8th of April as saying that it now expects benchmark Brent crude prices to average $66 per barrel in 2019, compared with its previous estimate of $62.50. It sees U.S. crude oil averaging $59.50 per barrel, up from its last forecast of $55.50. Oil prices hit their highest in 5 months today, with Brent marking $71.34 per barrel and U.S. crude reaching $64.70 per barrel. Crude markets have tightened this year as the United States imposed sanctions on oil exporters Iran and Venezuela, while the producers' curb OPEC has been withholding supply to prop up prices. Goldman added that it is expected the Brent forward curve to shift further into backwardation, a situation where the contract for future delivery are cheaper than spot supplies. Backwardation indicates a tighter market. That comes as Goldman expects the global oil market to remain in a supply deficit of about 500,000 barrels per day in the second quarter. Ex-Nissan boss Carlos Ghosn has accused former executives at the firm of backstabbing and says he's innocent of all charges against him. In a pre-recorded video released by his legal team, he said that he is a victim of a conspiracy and wanted a fair trial. Nissan said in response that there was substantial evidence against him. Ghosn was arrested for a fourth time last week while on bail awaiting trial on charges of financial misconduct and breach of trust. The company said that aside from any criminal matters, Nissan's internal investigation has uncovered substantial evidence of a blatantly unethical conduct, and further discoveries related to Ghosn's misconduct continue to emerge. In the video message, the 65-year-old, who was first arrested in November, maintained his denial of any wrongdoing or misconduct. He said the whole affair is a conspiracy and about backstabbing, adding that, quote, there was a fear that the next step of the alliance would in a certain way threaten some people or eventually threaten the autonomy of Nissan, unquote. Ghosn was the architect of the alliance between Nissan and French carmaker Renault and brought Mitsubishi on board in 2016.
I was not able to make the press conference that I planned for April.
The All-Share Price Index fell for a third straight session today to end 0.21% weaker at 5,538.66. The benchmark stock index rose 1.2% last week, recording its second consecutive weekly gain in 9. The index has declined 7.7% so far this year. Meanwhile, turnover came in at 187.6 million rupees, less than a third of this year's daily average of 626.4 million rupees. Foreign investors sold a net 93.5 million rupees worth of shares, extending a year-to-date net foreign outflow to 5.9 billion rupees worth of equities. We now have Dimantha Matthew from First Capital Holdings with a brief report on how the market performed during the day.
The bond markets was heavily active during the day, with selling pressure pushing yields upwards by about 20 basis points across the yield curve, following the central bank's decision to hold rates yesterday and delay the possible easing off. The stock market, of course, had a very low turnover day with low activity levels as the retailers were completely on the sidelines due to the festive season. Only Dialog had sizable volume in the market, accounting for about 50% of turnover. Turnover recorded was a 2-week low as the market dipped about 11 points.
Well, we have new international news on the other side, so make sure you stay tuned. But let's go for a short commercial break before that.
You are watching Sri Lanka's #1 news channel. This is AdaDerana 24.
British Prime Minister Theresa May is to hold last-minute Brexit talks with the leader of Germany and France later, 4 days before the UK is due to leave the EU. May is meeting Angela Merkel in Berlin, followed by Emmanuel Macron in Paris, to urge him to back her request to delay Brexit again until the 30th of June. She will be at an emergency summit tomorrow when all EU states will vote on an extension.
Queen Elizabeth yesterday granted royal assent to a Brexit delay bill that was passed by both the House of Lords and the House of Commons, meaning it has now become law. The new law will force Prime Minister Theresa May to ask the European Union for a Brexit extension again rather than leave the EU with no deal on the 12th of April. The cross-party proposal was raced through the House of Commons in a single day last week and completed its journey through the House of Lords on Monday night. Under the new terms, British lawmakers will still be able to tell the Prime Minister how long she should ask the EU to delay Brexit, but they will not be able to dispute whatever new date Brussels sets and send the Prime Minister back to ask again. Britain is on track to leave the EU on Friday, but the Prime Minister has chosen not to pursue a no-deal divorce. The Prime Minister wants to move the Brexit date from the 12th of April to the 30th of June, but EU leaders will give her a longer extension, which she does not prefer. May is travelling to Berlin and Paris today, a day before a critical EU summit that will discuss Britain's request for another delay to the date for its departure from the regional bloc. She will hold talks with German Chancellor Angela Merkel and French President Emmanuel Macron in a push to delay the Brexit date, which has already been extended from March 29th to the 12th of April. If the EU rejects May's proposal for a second extension to the 30th of June, Britain will face a no-deal Brexit on Friday.
9 pro-democracy activists in Hong Kong have been found guilty of public nuisance charges for their role in the civil disobedience movement that call for free elections in the city. Among them are 3 prominent activists seen as figureheads of Hong Kong's pro-democracy movement. They could be jailed for up to 7 years for their part in the umbrella movement protest of 2014. Thousands marched demanding the right for Hong Kong to choose its own leader. It is not yet clear when the group will be sentenced. St. Thomas College, Mount Lavinia today clinched the Under-19 Inter-School Division 1 Limited Overs Championship. They beat Richmond College Gaul by 12 runs. Batting first at the Gaul International Stadium, St. Thomas College racked up 261 all out in 49.4 overs. Johan Pereira was the star with the bat with his knock of 124. In that chase, Richmond College Gaul could only muster 249 runs all out with 5 deliveries left, falling 12 runs short of the victory target. Aditya Sirivardhana scored 53 with Bhanuka Manohara chipping in 51. The thrill of the contest unfortunately manifested in an unsavory fashion among the spectators after the match. Before we conclude the news tonight, just a short while ago, the Cabinet of Ministers has given the nod for the appointment of Nadun Guruge as the Commissioner General of Inland Revenue. Well, with that, we conclude this edition of First at 9. Thank you for joining us and have a pleasant evening.